Canberrans are expressing growing frustration at disruptions caused by protests, which are expected to increase this week. Key points: protests in Canberra are expected to increase ahead of the beginning of parliamentary sittings this week. Protests in Canberra are expected to increase ahead of the beginning of parliamentary sittings this week. Canberrans say the demonstrators are disrupting local businesses and harassing residents. Canberrans say the demonstrators are disrupting local businesses and harassing residents. Police warn commuters to expect delays and avoid the parliamentary zone. Thousands of demonstrators began gathering in Canberra last week to protest against COVID-19 vaccines and restrictions. Police forced them to move on from an unlawful campsite near the National Library of Australia, but more protesters have arrived ahead of the beginning of parliamentary sittings. Over the weekend, a convoy of demonstrators hampered traffic at Canberra Airport in an attempt to delay travellers. Bus services were also diverted this afternoon as protests disrupted traffic near the Australian War Memorial. On social media, ACT businesses and residents said groups of protesters harassed locals who were following health orders, such as by wearing masks and checking into venues. ACT policing also confirmed that officers were called to a city pub, King O'Malley's, on Saturday afternoon to help staff deal with patrons refusing to comply with mask-wearing requirements. Officers were called again that evening, when the pub closed its doors early to get rid of the patrons after they refused to leave. Making more enemies than friends. Andrew Barr says the ACT is firmly pro-vaccination. ACT Chief Minister Andrew Barr said Canberrans were hospitable and respected the right to protest. However, he said the demonstrators were making more enemies than friends. If the objective of these protesters is to win over hearts and minds, they are certainly not doing that, Mr. Barr said. There is a lot of frustration in Canberra at the moment with the behaviour of these individuals. Canberra is one of the most vaccinated cities on earth, so the message from these protesters is really not gelling with Canberrans, who are educated and who understand the value of vaccinations as a way of protecting themselves, their families, friends and indeed their fellow citizens. Mr. Barr also warned the groups that police would step in again if they acted unlawfully, and asked the protesters to respect Canberrans. What I'd say to those people is that the lives that they are disrupting and the businesses that they have been targeting here in Canberra don't deserve these sorts of attacks. Avoid parliamentary area, police. Demonstrators are expected to target the parliamentary area. ABC News, Ian Cutmore. ACT Policing Commander of Operations Linda Champion said Canberrans should brace for further protests, but police were deployed to minimise disruptions. We are expecting more protest activity today in and around the Parliamentary Triangle and potentially the airport, she said. Traffic diversions had been put in place, but she warned travellers to leave early to reach destinations on time and expect delays. We know it will peak tomorrow with the opening of Parliament and hopefully it will wind down soon after that, but anything could happen, Commander Champion said. She said that while the protests had remained mostly peaceful, police were monitoring the demonstrators' movements and their camping areas. Disparate and incoherent beliefs. The Canberra protests match similar demonstrations in Ottawa, Canada. AP, Adrian Wild. The protests mimic similar demonstrations overseas, including a larger-scale truck blockade in the Canadian capital Ottawa. But the aims of protesters are disparate. Some want COVID-19 vaccine mandates removed, some believe vaccines are harmful, some dispute the legality of the Australian government, and others believe in QAnon-style conspiracies. Liberal MLA Mark Parton says the protesters struggle to explain their objectives. ABC News, Tamara Pennicott. Mark Parton, a Liberal member of the ACT Legislative Assembly, said he spent more than an hour talking with demonstrators at their campsite last week. I found it very difficult to have a coherent discussion with any of them because they genuinely believe that all elected members of any parliament will be arrested for treason, he told the ABC. And some of them genuinely believe that there will be a public execution. When you're faced with that sort of narrative, It's very, very difficult to have a sensible argument. Mr. Parton said everyone he spoke with believed that the official pandemic data was falsified because every publicly elected official, every senior health official, is being bribed by big pharmaceutical companies.